this meeting with prayer. You could join me in prayer at this moment. Lord God, we ask for your hand on us as we begin this meeting, to give us the words to say with boldness in your spirit, to bring to light your truths of freedom. We ask your hand on us as we meet and ask for direction in the plans that we make. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Now, before I introduce Hal Shurliff, the Regional Director for John Birch Society, I'd like to read a quote from Adolf Hitler. The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subjected people to carry arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subjected people to carry arms have prepared for their own fall.
Mr. Hitler.
Wise words from a man who was dead, never to rise again.
Very
Hopefully, there again, let me introduce Hal Shurliff, our regional director.
Thanks, Ron.
To do this meeting.
I thought you were pulling out the Bible and now you're quoting Hitler. But anyway, I want to thank you all for coming today. And this is the first presentation I've done on this subject in a while. And first time I've used PowerPoint for the presentation. So I'll probably tighten it up and you may have some suggestions what I can add. I mean, we could talk for hours. After I finish on my brief presentation, Attorney Mike Walsh from Troy will be talking more of the state and the legal aspects, more of a micro aspect of it. But I'm going to be talking about global gun grab, something that the John Birch Society has been promoting for many, many years, and most people, even a lot of gun owners, dismissed it as, oh, it's not real, don't worry about it, they'll never take our guns, that's crazy, conspiracy theory, etc., etc. I took a trip with my son to the NRA headquarters, the museum in Virginia, beautiful museum. And he went into their bookstore, now this was 2003 or so, went into their bookstore, gift shop, and they had all kinds of books on guns, everything possible. They had Ted Nugent's autobiography, they had all the facts and figures about guns, the history of guns, but not one book talking about the biggest threat to gun ownership, the United Nations. And at the time, we had just printed, this one had just come out, Global Gun Grab, which I highly recommend. This was published in 2001, and I think more people are paying attention to the subject now, and I'm going to be talking about what. So I want to recommend this book. I also want to recommend the New American that comes out twice a month, has a feature story on the subject of this treaty, which I'll be talking about in length in a few minutes here. And copies are available for a whole $1 a piece. The subscription's highly recommended. Also in a PDF format. I'll be happy to get that to you in PDF format. Anyway, you see this picture of a Colt 357, right? This is a statue that is at the UN headquarters entrance if you're one of the tourists or one of the, you're visiting, and I actually been by there. Bill Grigg, the author of this book, was criticized by a man named Professor Nutter. A good name for a person like that. He was giving a symposium at a police event, and he's telling the police what to watch out for. And he said, including this obscure journalist by the name of William Norman Grigg. And William, we had a member of ours that was in attendance, and he told him about it. So he calls up Nutter, and Nutter said, do you really think the UN wants to take your guns? Why would you come up with such a notion like that? He says, Professor Nutter, have you ever been to the UN headquarters in New York City? Well, yeah, I've been there. Did you ever notice a statue of a gun with a barrel twisted? Yep. He said, well, where I come from, it's called a clue. Okay? And incidentally, it says on the base of the statue, it's quotes from the Bible, the Old Testament. They will beat their swords into plowshares. They leave it at that. The rest of the passage says, and he will be the ruler of all nations. He isn't Kofi Annan, Ban Moon, or Obama. It's the Lord God. That they deliberately omit. And there's a reason for that. Now, the reason being, to two documents. I want to contrast the U.S. Constitution. All of us are familiar with it. We've probably read it. We've probably read it lots of times. And a few words that we may not quite understand or are no longer in general use, we probably can figure out with a dictionary what they mean. And the UN Charter. How many people have read the UN Charter? Well, I know if you're a John Bircher, you have, right? Or the other UN documents since 1945 that they've come out with. the U.S. Constitution does not give us any rights. We don't have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. We have a right protected by God, given by God, that protects us. Those amendments are supposed to be there to protect us. And the federal government has absolutely no jurisdiction when it comes to states and firearms, because the Second Amendment says Congress shall make no law, you see. And the militia isn't the National Guard, right? And even if there wasn't a Second Amendment, we would still have the right to keep and bear arms. You think those militiamen on the election in Green said, oh my goodness, we don't have a right to do this. We guess we have to go home and turn our guns in. No, that's not it at all. The UN Charter, by the way, does not tell you where rights come from. It assumes or implies that rights come from government. If a government can give you something, they can also take it away. That's what we talk about. Some people say the right to keep bear arms is a civil right. Well, a civil right is a government-granted right. So I don't know if I want to rely on a civil right. I think it's a God-given right, but people are afraid to say that today. So you have to, some people are. Let me mention the UN Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Okay, this is if you're going to be a globalist and support this, you better know the organic documents of this entity, right? Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Isn't that nice, okay? No mention of the right to keep and bear arms whatsoever, okay? Article 12, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it, right? Article 19, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? What's wrong with that, you say? So far, so good, right? Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property, like they do in New London, Connecticut, and many other parts of the country, right? In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as to be determined by law. That's the clause that throws everything else out. And here's the kicker. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So, folks, do you think I'd be allowed to speak out against the UN if the UN Charter and this document becomes a law of the land? Oh, I don't know about that. I don't think so, right? Okay. The U.S. Declaration of Independence says that rights come from God. Thomas Jefferson was the major author of that, and there were a lot of others that had their opinion. He may not have been a traditional Christian, but he realized that there was a God in heaven, and that's where rights came from. That's something, by the way, you can't teach that in schools today. That's subversive, according to Supreme Court in the early 60s. The Constitution protects rights. It does not give them, okay? The Second Amendment protects the God-given right to keep and bear arms, to self-defense, okay? Now, that was only for the federal government. What about the states? Can the states ban the right to keep and bear arms? Well, every state constitution I've read, the wording is even stronger. Now, the New Hampshire Constitution, which I think, am I right, does it predate the U.S. Constitution by a couple of years? Yeah. The oldest constitution in the world is the Massachusetts Constitution. And so I looked at the New Hampshire Constitution. It said that all men have certain natural and essential and inherent rights, among which are the enjoying and defending of life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and in a word, of seeking and obtaining happiness. So you can defend your property. Not only do you own it, but you can defend it. That doesn't mean calling 911 and then hiding, right? Which is what they wanted us to do when the two guys, well, one guy was on the lam in Watertown, Massachusetts. The one guy can be really dangerous. A 19-year-old boy can be very dangerous if he's trained properly, right? An injured guy running around, it's not exactly a reason to lock down the whole city and everyone hide, but that's what we have today. Here is the UN headquarters. We call this the house that Hiss built. L.J. Hiss was the major author of the UN Charter. And you see the picture of him in the center. He's in prison garb. Why? Because he was jaywalking? No. Because he was found guilty of perjury. Say he was a Soviet agent. He was a spy for Stalin, the second most bloodiest dictator in the history of the 20th century. And that's saying a lot, by the way. Mao first, Stalin second, Hitler is a distant third. Hitler wouldn't make the playoffs if they had a, you know, if they had a despotism. He wouldn't make the cut. You see, pretty bad guy, but Stalin and Mao were worse. And this guy, from a upper middle class background, went to an Ivy League school. That's where he became a communist, Columbia University. You know, that's where most of these people are getting their crazy ideology, like Al Gore. You know, so he wrote the UN Charter. And I question people, what good can come from the pen of a Soviet agent, okay? Now, you say, what's this got to do with gun control? It's got everything to do with gun control. 1961, State Department document 7277, and I have copies available if you would like them. This became the U.S. policy. John Kennedy signed this into law. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, Kennedy was, he had some good qualities. Yeah, that's true. But he was also the one that said, I'm going to turn my military over to the UN. We're going to make this happen. Hasn't happened yet, okay? So the specific objectives, the disbanding of all national armed forces, the creation of a UN standing army. We don't have that yet, but it's something that's in the works. The end of the manufacturing of arms, except those required by a United Nations peace force and for maintaining internal order. That's Agenda 21. Now, this is what they call internal order. These are the guys, the folks that, the nice officer friendlies in Watertown that did unauthorized searches of homes. And one of the footage we see, a house full of people. Of course, everybody had to be home, so to sit around, and they didn't just say anybody there. They just assumed that they were criminals, and they had their hands, they're coming out, and then they had to run, and then they frisked them, you see. And they were carrying, what, Nathaniel? They were carrying machine pistols designed to kill soldiers, not just to stop a wound, you see. And so these aren't UN soldiers, but these are Americans that have forgot the Constitution, or maybe even never learned about it, okay? Here are some new American back issues, just to say that the JPS has been on the frontier of this for many years. Coming Your Way, a UN World Army, and this one in here, police state. We could have had this come out the day after the bombing, right? 1992, we were talking about the creation of a police state in this country and the creation of a world standing army as well. And back in the mid-90s, there was well, I shouldn't say infamous, because I met the gentleman who did the survey. In fact, he was at the Lexington Green back, the first Oath Keepers meeting there about 5 years ago. But he took a survey, and one of the survey questions was, if the United States government declares has a ban on the right to keep and bear arms, and there's an amnesty period, you know, and would you fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse to turn in their weapons after the amnesty period? 35% of them said that they would, and that was in the mid-90s. I don't know what that figure would be today, right? And of course, the people say, oh, this is a theory, conspiracies. Well, there's old Hillary. Hillary is a dedicated globalist. She advocates a one-world government. She shouldn't be a parking lot attendant. And I apologize to the good, honorable parking lot attendants around the country who may be watching. No, I'm serious, right? She's a dangerous person. She was Secretary of State. She's a big supporter of the UN and a complete ban on weapons, except for her, you know, for the governments of the world. And of course, John Kerry is probably even worse. All right, that could be possible. A very important book for those who are saying, oh, this is not, the government has gone, that means they're safe, they're in good hands. Death by Government by R.J. Rummel, a liberal, by the way, professor, University of Hawaii. This book came out in the late 90s, I think. I've read the book. It's a really hard book to read. It's not something, oh, this is fun, you know. Oh, this chat, I can't go to sleep. I want to read the whole thing. He said that more people have been murdered in peacetime in the 20th century by their governments than in all the wars in the 20th century. Over 100 million souls, just like you and I, were murdered by governments. And always the people have been disarmed. Okay, always. Armenia, back in World War I. You don't see too many movies about this. You don't hear any, unless you have Armenian friends. 2 million Christians, Catholics and Protestants, were murdered by the moderate Muslims that were running They were the new Turks. That, you know, they were progressives, but they somehow retrogressed a little bit, and they killed. And I read an account, brutal. They actually crucified some of these folks, especially clergy members. Right? Russia, under Stalin up to today, we don't know how many, 30 to 60 million forced famines, and the first thing they did is took the guns away. Germany under Hitler, we know the story about that. In peacetime now, I'm not talking about the war, in peacetime, okay? Communist China, I met some folks at the Falun Gong, and they tell me 100 million. No one really knows, because there wasn't probably any accurate census taken, but between 60 to 100 million people that were murdered since 1945. In that country, forced abortions and gun control is alive and well. Cambodia. I met this nice lady. She was a waitress in a restaurant. She said her family were very wealthy Cambodians. They were able to survive. And I said, 20% of your country was wiped out by the Khmer Rouge. She said, we think 50% of the country, of 6 million. So I guess per capita, that's probably the biggest genocide. And you know, if you look at, how about Rwanda? Now here is the UN in action. Okay, you had two tribes. By the way, these tribes didn't have a history of killing each other up until the 50s, right? 1950s, I'm talking about. Well, the Tutsis were the group in power, and the Hutus were not in power. And the UN had a civilian mission, and they had a military mission. The military mission was led by a Canadian general. I think his name was Deliere, probably pronouncing his name wrong. Excuse me, my French friends out there who are criticizing my pronunciation. He got wind of this planned atrocity, planned genocide. It was all planned, by the way. These things just don't happen, right? These things that get out of control. All of these things are planned by government, okay? And he wanted to intervene. Kofi Annan, the head of the military, the mission, the civilian mission that was, you know, over the military mission, said, stand down. In fact, some of the UN troops actually disarmed some of the Hutus. And in about a 3 or 4 month period, close to 1 million, maybe a little bit longer than that, close to 1 million people were murdered, most of them hacked to death by machetes. There was a few examples of one person actually had a hand grenade, and he was able to hold off a whole batch of these folks. And a few people fought back because they had illegal handguns or illegal weapons. They were able to survive. There are some cases where mothers were begging the UN soldiers, white Europeans, by the way, shoot us and shoot our children. We'd rather be shot than be hacked to death, right? And very little was said, and there's some pictures of these poor souls, piles of dead bodies. The world didn't really care too much. In a couple, at the end of next month, I'm going to have, speaking at our luncheon in the Boston area, a man who witnessed the murder, the massacres of Sudan. 2 million Christians, we're talking recently, okay? Did the world say anything about it? And the UN, by the way, the UN supported the Sudanese government, supported. And there's actually a man, a friend, I don't know him personally, a man named Peter Hammond, who has a missionary outreach program, that said that the UN wanted his head. They wanted him because he was such a threat to them. Okay, so here is the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty, ATT. In March, it came up for a vote. 123 voted in favor, 3 voted against it. There were 23 that weren't there. Our delegation voted for this Arms Trade Treaty. Let me discuss the treaty a little bit here. Article 1, treaty grants a monopoly over all weaponry in the hands of approved regimes, governments. The same regimes that have committed these atrocities, by the way. Right? Nice and safe. The treaty leaves private citizens powerless to oppose future slaughters. Okay? Article 2, the right to own, buy, sell, trade, or transfer all means of armed resistance is denied to civilians. Okay? Article 3, ammo is also controlled. Our government, by the way, some of you may know this already, our government has been bought 1 billion or 2 billion rounds.
2.3.
2.3 billion rounds. It's not for the U.S. military.
Hollow points.
Hollow point, right. Which are they're not designed just to slow you down, are they, right? Article 4, all parts of weapons under government control, right? Article 5 mandates that all countries participating in the treaty shall establish and maintain a national control system, including a national ID system, okay? So that's what this treaty entails. Now, some good things have happened. A resolution was added to, an amendment was added to a bill to say the Senate won't approve of this, and you do need 2/3 of the Senate, but 2/3 of the people present, not 2/3 of the 100. So if you had a quorum, you had 51 people, they could pass this thing, you know, they could pass it. So 53 senators said they're in favor, they're against the UN treaty. 46 said that they would support the treaty. Now that's an awful close, okay? But thankfully, I don't usually say too many things about liberal Democrats, but Patrick Leahy, because he's from Vermont, you know, Vermont has a very good policy on the right to bear arms. He has an amendment saying the treaties don't overrule the Constitution. By the way, this notion that a treaty overrides the Constitution is and my attorney friend will point that out, is nonsense. Thomas Jefferson wrote that if the President and 2/3 of the Senate can do what no one else can do, we have no Constitution. But you see, because there's been so much misunderstanding, although there was a case back in the 20s, Missouri versus Holland, a treaty with Canada, migratory birds, that said, oh, treaties supersede the Constitution. Well, I'm not too worried. Usually, I think it had to do with hunting seasons in Louisiana. Treaties might supersede state constitutions, but they don't supersede personal rights, you know, granted by, protected by the Constitution. Oh, you have no, it's null and void. It's supposed to be things between nations and nations, naval treaties, mail, trade, things of that nature. Those are legitimate. Things that deal with guns have no prerogative in any treaty. And by the way, it's my opinion that any treaty with the UN is null and void in its face. A UN is not a nation. It's a collection of misfits appointed by mostly socialist governments. There's no elected officials at the UN. There's no accountability at the UN. You know? So I think a treaty, and I hope my attorney friend will back me up on it, I think a treaty with the UN is null and void on its face to begin with. Okay. Mike Kelly and Moran, these are congressmen, have offered similar resolutions in the House. See, the treaties would be passed by the Senate, but the Congress, the House, would have to appropriate money to implement this, you see. So that's one way you can stop. So right now, it looks like we're safe to an extent, but I never rely on any elected official ever. I don't care if they come to your meetings and shake your hands and belong to the NRA. They can sell you out, and they'll do that as often as they can. But the immigration issue, aren't we surprised to find out a lot of these folks who are great, oh, they're great conservatives, next thing you know, they're signing up for this ridiculous amnesty program, right? Okay, so what to do right now, when you get home, get a hold of your congressman, senator, congressman, support H.R. 75, a bill to get us out of the United Nations. It was sponsored by a congressman from Georgia, Paul, whose name I forget, but H.R. 75. Get the New Hampshire House and Senate to pass resolutions against the ATT as well, because even though your delegation can ignore that, it does give an express, and it gets it talked about too, as more people know about this. I imagine the average gun owner probably has little idea about this treaty being proposed, right? Oppose all gun control measures at all levels. Okay, at all levels. And what we see what happens in Boston, you know, with unarmed citizens and what can happen with unarmed citizens. It's interesting that they had this lockdown. They call us Boston Strong, and we're so heroic. The people who responded, the first responders, were heroic. Yeah. And I'm sure those guys, the policemen on that first call, they were probably heroic. But I don't know about, you get 1,000 guys with the machine pistols and shields, and I don't know how heroic that is, and how heroic it is to hide in your homes. You know, can you imagine the governor saying, ladies and gentlemen, I know some of you are armed. I don't want you going around being cowboys. He said, but lock and load and be ready. And if you spy anybody, get a hold of us. That's what a governor who advocated freedom. And as soon as he lifted the lockdown, somebody said, well, what's changed? The guy's still loose. Why did you change that? He didn't have an answer for that. He goes, well, we can't just lock you down forever. And 5 minutes later, didn't a citizen say, hey, the guy's on my boat? And the poor guy lost, they towed his boat away. What do you need, what do you need to tow the boat away for? They have the boat. It's probably going to be the Smithsonian or something, right? This poor guy was doing his duty. I said, hey, I'm ahead to have a cigarette break, and I see blood in my boat. Must be the guy looking for. Sure enough. So all the king's horses and all the king's men and all the spy cameras and Homeland Security couldn't stop these bums. It took one little citizen to do it, and then all of a sudden we can play baseball again. We can fly planes over the space again. Isn't that great? Yeah, we can go out and breathe fresh air again because this one guy found the guy in his boat. And I also want to suggest that you join the John Birch Society. And I say this because we've got plenty of years of experience. We've got a full-time field staff, guys like me, that will get you to do things and organize events. We have local chapters working on Considered Action program. We have a research arm, the New American Magazine, a monthly bulletin, and we produce DVDs, CDs, and online materials and resources. You know, there's a lot of great groups out there. I go to a lot of their events, and usually when I say, okay, what do you have for information? A pamphlet, a t-shirt, and a cap, you know. We need this. This is the stuff we need to get in the hands of our friends and neighbors and to use as great resources. How many people's minds have been changed by reading a powerful book? I'll tell you about this book. A friend of mine had been on staff for a while. He was off staff, and he has a coin dealership in Ohio. And there was a law firm right next to his coin shop. He was upstairs on the second floor. And the lawyer was a real patriot and a real conservative. The wife was a little bit on the wishy-washy liberal side, right? Well, at night, before they go to bed, he read this book to her. Now, she said, you got to teach me how to shoot. She's actually more to the right than he is, you know. He's the wishy-washy one now, right? Because a book was read and our eyes were opened. You know, I posted a picture on my Facebook page. There was a little smear piece done about the Agenda 21 and my efforts and they mentioned the John Birch Society called Nelson Mandela. Could you believe this? A communist thug, right? So what I did was I got a picture of Mandela with the head of the South African Communist Party, clenched fist salute, and a picture of the communist flag in the background. And I said, yeah, I'll be crazy. It's called proof and evidence. You know, the guy's a communist thug. You say you don't have to deny that, but I had the resource. In this case, it was on Google Images, but I knew it existed because of our publications. So it's always good to have the information. And I mean, how many people know about 7277? I bet you if you went back to your the NRA groups, and even some Oath Keeper people, they probably have never heard of it unless they've had exposure to our material. So that's why it's so important to support. Even if you can't be all that active, you can still support us. So with that, I want to thank you, and I want to turn this over to Mr. Mike Walsh.
Thank you. Okay. Just going to stand in front of this desk here.
What you said about the Constitution